Yeah, good evening, ma'am. Yeah, good evening, everyone. I would like to invite our speaker, Dr. Amar Shah. He is MCH pediatric surgeon and FRCS in pediatric surgery. He is pediatric and neonatal surgeon. Very importantly, he is the endoscopic surgeon and very excellent expertise in the neurosurgery. He is the director of Amardeep Multi-Specialty Children Hospital and Research Center, and that is in Ahmedabad. He is the Joint Secretary, Indian Association of Pediatrics during 1990 to 21, Executive Member, Society of Pediatric Urology 2016 to 18, and Executive Member, Pediatric Endoscopic Surgeon of the India nowadays. I request Dr. Amar Shah, without any delay, please start your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Rao. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, sir, you are audible and visible.
At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, Dr. Ashish Mehta and the entire team of Milan to invite me to give a talk on this August forum. I'll be discussing on fetal malformations, their consequences in management. Now, this is a very huge topic, and I'll try to do as much justice as possible in the allotted time that is given to me. So the incidence of congenital anomalies is quite less. Major anomalies are seen in only 2 to 3% of babies, whereas minor anomalies are seen in about 14%. But the important thing that we should remember is that congenital anomalies are the cause of death in almost 20% of babies in their first week of life. So what are the causes of congenital anomalies? Almost 2/3 of the anomalies occur because of unknown causes. About 10 to 25% are because of genetic problems, and 10% are because of environmental problems like maternal conditions, infectious agents, mechanical problems, etc. So what is the aim of establishing an antenatal diagnosis in the preterm phase? First, to inform and prepare the parents for the birth of an affected infant. Second, to allow delivery at a specialized center for immediate postnatal treatment. To allow the termination of an affected fetus if required, and to allow in utero treatment. But the most important thing is to help parents make an informed choice, which is best for them and their family. The anomaly scan, which is the ultrasound scan, is performed at 20 to 22 weeks, and about 70% of fetal malformations are detected at this scan. The detection of problems can help plan the treatment after birth, and in the event of a serious problem, parents can decide not to continue with the pregnancy. So these are the various problems which can be picked up on the anomaly scan. Neural problems are quite accurately picked up. Cardiac problems, the pickup rate is somewhat low, whereas problems like abdominal wall defects, renal problems, limb defects have a good pickup on the anomaly scan. Fetal MRI is quite popular in recent times. It was started in the 1990s. And as compared to the ultrasound, it provides a superior soft tissue contrast resolution. Multiplanar imaging is easier with the fetal MRI, and it provides a large field of view. It is also easily understood by the parents, practitioners, and auxiliary support staff. However, the disadvantages are that it is expensive, fetal movements and claustrophobia may be a hindrance for the fetal MRI. So let's see the different systems where the fetal malformations can be picked up. This is the genitourinary system, the GI system, nervous system, face and neck, thorax, limbs, tumors and cysts, and miscellaneous problems. I'll be discussing briefly into each of these systems. So let's come to the genitourinary system, which is the most commonly picked up antenatal anomaly. Here, the structural problems that are picked up can be problems with the kidney, like hydronephrosis, which may be unilateral or bilateral, multicystic kidney, hydroureter, that is dilatation of the ureter, which may be unilateral or bilateral, bladder outlet obstruction, any cysts related to the kidney, and bladder extrophy. Now, let's come to the postnatal management of antenatal problems of the genitourinary system. All newborns with prenatally detected dilated uropathies should be commenced on postnatal antibiotics pending investigations. The exceptions are antenatally detected hydronephrosis with an AP diameter less than 10 millimeters, a multicystic dysplastic kidney with a contralateral normal kidney, and an ectopic kidney with no evidence of dilatation. So we'll deal with one problem after the other. Unilateral hydronephrosis. Now this is the anomaly scan showing a unilateral hydronephrosis. What can be the causes of this? First, a pelvic-ureteric junction obstruction, a vesico-ureteric reflux, or any distal obstruction like a vesico-ureteric junction obstruction or a bladder outlet obstruction. What should be the postnatal management of an antenatally diagnosed unilateral hydronephrosis? The most important thing is to get an ultrasound scan done 24 to 48 hours after birth with measurements of the renal pelvis and the ureter status. If the child is a male, consider doing an early maturating cystourethrogram. However, if the child is a female, then follow-up may be warranted and MCU should be done at a later date. By an early MCU, I am meaning that the MCU should be done within 4 to 6 weeks of life. What if there is bilateral hydronephrosis, as it is seen here? This could be again because of bilateral PUJ obstructions, vesico-ureteric reflux, and distal obstructions like vesico-ureteric junction obstruction, and most important is the bladder outlet obstruction. Now, a controversial remark here would be that sex determination may help plan the management in cases of bilateral hydronephrosis. I'll come to that detail in the present slide. So what should be the postnatal management of antenatally diagnosed bilateral hydronephrosis? Ultrasound scan, again, within the first 24 hours after birth with measurements of the renal pelvis and determining the status of the ureter, whether it is dilated or not. If the child is a male, here is the important thing. An urgent MCU is warranted because the most common cause of bladder outlet obstruction leading to bilateral hydronephrosis in a male neonate is posterior urethral valves. However, if the child is a female, an early MCU, as early as about 4 to 6 weeks, should be done to rule out vesico-ureteric reflux, and then the female baby can be followed up. This is the MCU, which shows primary bilateral vesico-ureteric reflux. This is the bladder, this is the urethra, and this is bilateral gross reflux, which is going up to the kidneys. Here is the MCU showing not a very good sized bladder with a hugely dilated posterior urethra, and this is what is called a posterior urethral valve. The other important thing to note here is that it has caused gross amount of reflux right up to the kidney. So that is why posterior urethral valves should always be kept in mind in male neonates who have antenatally bilateral hydronephrosis. So now we come to this bladder outlet obstruction problem. PU valves is seen in about 1 in 4,000 to 8,000 males. The antenatal ultrasound features is first a male fetus, bilateral upper tract dilatation, and a persistently distended full bladder and posterior urethra, giving the classical keyhole sign. This is the ultrasound scan, which shows the dilated bladder and the posterior urethra, and a fetal MRI showing a hugely dilated bladder and a dilated posterior urethra, giving the classic keyhole sign of posterior urethral valves. Now, what are the predictors of a fetus with PU valves? The predictors of poor functional outcome and early onset renal failure can be determined by the following points. First, detection before 24 weeks of gestation, echo-bright kidneys, which may suggest renal dysplasia, oligohydramnios. Biochemical tests of the fetal urine like sodium, calcium, osmolality, etc. have a relatively low predictive sensitivity for a predictive outcome. Postnatal management of antenatally detected child who has confirmed posterior urethral valves. A postnatal ultrasound will show a thickened full bladder with a dilated posterior urethra. An early MCU, as I said, should be done to document whether the child has got posterior urethral valves and reflux. Cystoscopic fulguration of the valves should be done even in the neonatal period after the child is stabilized. Even a simple urethral catheter can help stabilize the child in the neonatal period. And the important thing is that only 20 to 25% of kids are destined to develop renal failure in later life. This is a child who was operated for posterior urethral valves in the neonatal period. He further had reflux nephropathy and one of his kidneys had to be taken out. He is now 22 years old And as you can see, he is doing very well for himself. The next problem is multicystic dysplastic kidney. The incidence is about 1 to 2,500 to 4,000 live births. It is seen bilateral in 1 in 20,000 pregnancies. The reason is the faulty development of the ureteric bud and the metanephric mesenchyme. Multicystic dysplastic kidney may be undetectable and the child is symptom-free and outwardly normal. However, it may lead to hypertension, infection, and malignancy in later life. So what should be done for MCD case? If the child has got a unilateral multicystic dysplastic kidney with a contralateral normal kidney, radionuclear scan on a planned basis can be done to document if there is any function. Mostly these are non-functioning kidneys. If the contralateral kidney is abnormal or it shows ureteric or renal dilatation, then an MCU should be done to see if there is vesico-ureteric reflux. There is almost 10 to 15% chance that a contralateral kidney in a MCDK would have vesico-ureteric reflux. Coming to the next problem, bladder extrophy. Bladder extrophy is a very major problem. It requires multiple surgeries. Even after multiple surgeries, continence is a major issue. And hence, can I request the mic to be mute, please? Dr. Asutosh, can you please mute your mic? Thank you. And parents should have the choice to decide whether they wish to continue the pregnancy or not.
Akshita, please see that all mics should stay muted. Thanks.
So these are babies with bladder extrophies. Sometimes we have 2 at a time, although it is quite an uncommon problem. As you can see here, they are commonly associated with epispedia. So the entire bladder and the urethral complex is all opened up. In this pregnancy, the parents decided not to continue. So this was the aborted fetus. And as you can see, this is the extrophy bladder with the epispadias. So that we have done with the genitourinary system. And now we move to the gastrointestinal system. Now 4 major problems can be picked up on antenatal scans: esophageal atresia, duodenal atresia, bowel atresia, and abdominal wall defects. Esophageal atresia, I don't need to do much for educating this audience about esophageal atresia. But the 2 main types are the type A, where the upper pouch is blind and the lower pouch is blind and it is not communicating with the trachea. The type C, which is seen in almost 80%, is where the upper pouch is blind and the lower pouch is communicating with the trachea. Okay, so this is the type C, which is most commonly seen. And the next most common is the type A. Now, how does it make a difference on the antenatal scan? Polyhydramnios in esophageal atresia is seen in only 20 to 25% of the babies. Sometimes in cases of type A esophageal atresia, where the amniotic fluid may not have a tract to go into the stomach may be seen either very small or an absent stomach may be diagnosed. However, when there is a large fistula, the amniotic fluid may go inside through the trachea and then into the stomach. And hence, polyhydramnios may not be that obvious. What should be done postnatally? Normally, the babies are born frothy. That is, there is no tract for the saliva to go distally, and hence it all collects from the mouth and the nose. A wide bore tube is not able to pass into the stomach. If you pass a wide bore tube and take an X-ray, it would be seen curled up in the upper esophagus. The abdomen would normally be gasless in cases of a pure esophageal atresia, as there is no tract for the air to enter into the stomach. However, in type C, there is a fistula which is present between the esophagus and the trachea, and so air escapes from the trachea into the fistula and air would be seen in the stomach and the entire GI tract. Early referral and surgery after stabilization of the child is a must. Results of esophageal atresia are very good and almost in the range of 85 to 90%. Pure esophageal atresias, that is type A esophageal atresias, will need 2-stage surgeries, where the child first requires a cervical esophagostomy and a feeding gastrostomy. And then when he is about 6 to 8 months of age, we do a gastric pull-up in order to replace the absent esophagus. Next is duodenal obstruction. It is seen in 1 in 6,000 births. The classic double bubble appearance is seen on the antenatal scan. The causes of duodenal obstruction may be duodenal atresia, a duodenal web, annular pancreas, or duodenal stenosis. Almost 20 to 25% have associated trisomy 21, and the fetal medicine people should be cautious about that. Surgical results for duodenal obstruction are excellent. Bowel obstructions, on the other hand, are 1 in 3,000 live births. Ultrasound is suggestive, but may not always be diagnostic for bowel obstruction. MRI in these children is helpful. The child is normally born symptom-free, but when time goes by, gradually the secretions start collecting and clinical signs may appear. A plain postnatal X-ray confirms the diagnosis, and outcome for bowel atresias again is very good. This is the MRI scan which shows dilated bowels, and this is the perioperative picture showing a child with a bowel atresia. Here, this is the hugely dilated proximal ileum. Here is the atresia, and you can see here the tiny distal ileum. Next, we come to abdominal wall defects, omphalocele or exomphalos as they are commonly called. The incidence is about 1 in 5,000 live births. Here, the extruded intestines and the liver are covered by a layer of amnion. They may have associated chromosomal defects, and midline defects may also be present. So whenever you see a child with an omphalocele, always make sure you document whether the child has got any other midline defects. Large omphaloceles may require a C-section. However, smaller ones can be delivered normally. The outcome again for omphaloceles is quite good. This is an antenatal scan showing a abdominal wall defect. This is the fetal MRI showing a large exomphalos. These are some postnatal pictures. This is the child with a exomphalos. This is how it looks post repair. This is a baby girl who's got a large abdominal wall defect. Sometimes these children may not be subjected to straight away surgery because the abdomen does not have the capacity to hold that much amount of bowel and the liver straight away. So sometimes we have to do a staged approach to manage these children, and the long-term prognosis is quite good. As compared to exomphalos, gastroschisis is seen in 1 in 5,000 live births. It is more commonly seen in young mothers. Associated defects in gastroschisis are very uncommon, unlike exomphalos. Bowel atresias may be present in gastroschisis. A prolonged hospital stay and TPN may be required, and an early referral leads to a better prognosis. This is a child with a gastroschisis. This is the antenatal scan showing the gastroschisis. When I was in the UK, we used to manage gastroschisis by the Bianchi technique, where the child is given sedation. A small dose of morphine is given, and then the bowels are gradually coaxed inside the abdomen, and then the umbilical cord with the obstetricians invariably keep long, helps to close that defect. And then the child is kept on TPN, and this bowel is allowed to gradually recover on its own. But early referral is the key for a good survival and successful outcome of gastroschisis.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. You have 4 minutes more.
Okay, I thought I had 25 minutes. It's 17 minutes.
Sir,
Okay, I'll go slightly faster.
Yeah,
So now we
this is a
come.
reminder, just finish by 25 minutes, that's it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Thanks.
Now we go to the nervous system, hydrocephalus. The transverse atrial width in an antenatal scan should be more than 10 millimeters for it to be suggestive to be a hydrocephalus. The aqueductal stenosis is commonly seen in about 20%, Chiari-2 malformation in 30%, and Dandy-Walker malformation is seen in 10% of cases. Associated chromosomal defects need to be evaluated, and again, antenatal MRI is helpful. These are the antenatal ultrasound scans showing dilated ventricles. This is the child with hydrocephalus. Again, fetal MRI showing dilated ventricles and a posterior fossa cyst. The prognostic factors. Good prognostic factors would be an isolated ventriculomegaly with less than 12 millimeters size. Poor prognostic factors may be progressive hydrocephalus. Progressive hydrocephalus before 28 weeks will result in irreversible damage by 32 weeks. In utero deviation of more than 4 weeks for hydrocephalus, and cortical mantle thinning of less than 1.5 centimeters. Neural tube defects are seen in 1 in 1,000 pregnancies. It occurs very early in pregnancy by the 3rd or the 4th week. The exact cause, as we all know, is not known. Maternal serum AFP and amniotic fluid AFP is indicative, and fetal MRI is again diagnostic. This is the antenatal scan showing a small encephalocele. This is a meningomyelocele, again seen on the fetal MRI. These children have a poor prognosis. They have paraplegia. This is an open neural tube defect with anal sphincter incontinence and paraplegia. These are large encephaloceles. Again, they have a poor prognosis. The common myths which is in neural tube defects is that most children are stillborn or have a short lifespan. However, the incidence of stillbirth in neural tube defects is less than 5%. 91% survive beyond the 1st year of life, and more than 76% are alive beyond their 25th year. Most of the children are mentally retarded is another common myth. The facts are that the average IQ of a child with a neural tube defect is 80 to 85. 63% of the children with BP shunts have an IQ of more than 80, and 87% of children without shunts have an IQ of more than 80. Closed defects have a better prognosis than open defects. Again, prognosis for walking, higher the lesion, the lesser are the chances that the child would be able to walk independently. So in children with neural tube defects, parents and children need comprehensive medical, psychological, and social support and management. This was the MOM study which was done in the US, where they studied fetal surgery for meningomyelocele versus postnatal repair. And the oral conclusion they had was that when meningomyelocele were repaired during the in utero period, the relative complications were less. I won't go into those details because we are short of time. Now we come to the face and the neck problems. This could be teratomas, lymphangiomas, cysts. They can enlarge in large portions and may cause airway compressions after birth. They can also compress the esophagus, causing polyhydramnios. Pregnancy is to be continued under close monitoring. However, in the event of polyhydramnios, amniotic fluid tapping and conservative measures can be planned. Issues of preterm labors need to be assessed, and preparations during delivery should be done to take care of the neonatal respiratory tract. This is a large lymphangioma which was diagnosed prenatally. This is the child after he was born. Again, cystic lesions behind the tongue can also cause respiratory issues. This was picked up antenatally. Now we come to face and neck defects, cleft lip and cleft palate. Formally, the antenatal sonography needs to be examined in 3 planes. Other anomalies or soft markers need to be searched. The high-risk groups in these cases are where the parents have a history of facial clefts, there is a family history of facial clefts, or the patients have epilepsy. This is the antenatal scan showing bilateral cleft lip, and this is the postnatal. Cleft lips and cleft palates have very good results, and these children should not undergo unnecessary termination. Coming to the thorax, there are congenital cystadenomatous malformations and lung sequestrations. Antenatal ultrasound shows a solid mass in the chest. MRI may give more information. This is antenatal picture showing a cystadenomatous malformation. Again, this is the post-operative picture. This is the large CCAM which is seen in one of the lung lobes, and this is after excision. Prognosis again is very good, and the child stays to live a normal life. Sequestrations may have an abnormal communication from the aorta. This is a child with a lung sequestration. You can see this large vessel which is coming from the aorta, supplying the sequestration. The outcome and prognosis for thoracic lesions are not commonly associated with chromosomal anomalies. Large lesions may cause fetal hydrops. The ratio of the CCAM volume and the head circumference, if it is more than 1.6, 80% develop hydrops in the antenatal period. Small lesions in the chest may present as respiratory distress. However, some smaller lesions may also go unnoticed till they produce any complications. Large lesions causing hydrops may warrant for termination or wait or fetal surgery. If there is no hydrops, regular follow-up may be required. So many of these lesions may shrink before birth and nothing is required postnatally. If symptomatic, early surgery is warranted, and as I said, prognosis is excellent in these cases. Congenital diaphragmatic hernias may be right, left, or bilateral. the degree of the fetal liver herniation into the chest and the lung head circumference ratio is suggestive of a prognostic criteria. Fetal chromosomes, echo and MRI need to be done. These are MRI pictures and ultrasound pictures of a diaphragmatic hernia. Postnatal management involves a planned delivery, immediate stabilization, access to ventilation. There is no need to rush for surgical correction. Management of PPHN is a must to ensure a good outcome for diaphragmatic hernias. These are limb defects which may be picked up. We won't go into these details. Tumors and cysts like sacrococcygeal teratomas, they are rare, 1 in 35,000 to 1 in 40,000 live births. They are antenatally picked up. Postnatally, they should be operated in quite good time. The prognosis is good. Tumors and cysts are also picked up on antenatal scans. These are large teratomatous tumors. It is unfortunate that the child was delivered. Such children do have a very poor prognosis. Miscellaneous problems like conjoined twins, cardiac tumors and defects can also be detected on the antenatal scans. Incomplete or parasitic twins do have a good prognosis. Even God sometimes has conjoined problems in nature. Open fetal surgery, though it is advanced in the United Kingdom, for us it is still in the infancy phase. For the Indian scenario, the main problem is neonatal transfer. Right from the birth of Lord Krishna, we are having a problem of neonatal transfer. And so the main important thing when the child is in a setup where there are no facilities available is to ensure an in utero transfer. That the child is transferred in utero to a center where adequate neonatology care, good pediatric surgical care is available, and the life of the child can be saved. This is a quick video of in utero transfer for a diaphragmatic hernia and the operative and the post-operative management, but I won't go into details because I am almost now at the end of my talk. I would just like to highlight, this is the last slide. With the help of Indian Association of Pediatric Surgeons, of whom I am the Joint Secretary, we had detailed discussions about neonatal insurance with the Star Health and Allied Insurance Company. And they have brought out a Star comprehensive insurance policy where the newborn with any disease, including congenital defects and vaccinations, would also be covered. The only thing that they need to have is that both the parents need to be covered under this policy 2 years prior to the birth of the child. It would only be then and then that the newborn would be covered for any neonatal insurance, whether it would be congenital or not. This is the slide that has been given by them. So with that, I end my talk. And again, I would thank you all for allowing me to talk on this August podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab, for excellent presentation. It was very eye-opening, and very important part from your presentation was the very safe and early transport of the neonate is much required, because even in our nursery we have two pediatric surgeons, but because of bad and late referral of congenital diaphragmatic hernia and late diagnosis of other problem like urosurgical problem, we face a lot of problem. Even posterior urethral valve babies are being diagnosed at the age of 1 year, 2 years. This is the major junk in our country. So early referral is very important for neonatal surgery and good outcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for the kind words.